Hey everyone, Mr. Evans here with your pre-recorded live lesson for Unit 4, Lesson 12, Modest Disturbances in Ecosystems.
This one's going to be kind of a short one in terms of content because we've already kind of hit a lot of this stuff. We're just going to go into a couple more terms in a little bit more detail, and I'm actually just going to go straight off of the lesson pod here and kind of just elaborate on a few terms as we go. And then also, I'm actually going to put the quick check questions on the video as well, because some of the quick check questions are a little weird and I want to go over them to make sure that everyone understands them. So a modest disturbance in an ecosystem is something that will kind of disrupt an ecosystem, but it gets over it quickly. It doesn't destroy the ecosystem. It doesn't completely crash and, crash and burn everything. It's just a little hit, and sometimes those little hits are even necessary for the long-term health of the ecosystem. So think of something like a tornado. A tornado will tear through a forest. And by the way, we're talking about like natural ecosystems here. Obviously, a tornado can completely wipe out a town, but in terms of the actual natural ecosystem, a tornado might rip up some trees, it might scatter some dirt, might displace some animals from their homes, but long term, it doesn't really do anything. An ecosystem will recover relatively quickly from a tornado, and that's just one example. There's a few others, but sometimes these very modest events actually promote the longer term health of the ecosystem. It can maybe knock down the population of a species that has overpopulated the area a little bit. It can force some animals to like move to a different area to spread out the population so that the competition between the individuals in the species isn't so high. It just kind of forces movement when that is possible. Imagine if you have a group of coyotes all living in the same area, and they're kind of fighting with each other and they're all scrambling for food. If some kind of natural event comes through that doesn't destroy the area entirely, but it does force part of that population to move, that kind of it hurts a little bit for the coyotes in the beginning, but it spreads them out so they're not competing with each other as much. So that's called the intermediate disturbance hypothesis, where a mild disruption actually has a longer term benefit for the ecosystem as a whole. You've seen this word over and over again, homeostasis. An ecosystem has homeostasis too. Homeostasis is balance. An ecosystem has to be in balance for it to maintain itself. And one little trigger event can cause a cascade that just ripples up the whole food chain and messes up the area in ways that are hard to even predict or think about. Some of them are easy to predict, like if you kill off all the deer in the forest, then obviously anything in the forest that eats the deer is going to starve. That one is pretty easily predictable. But there's other things that you don't even think about, which is why whenever you're going to disrupt an ecosystem with a project, or maybe someone wants to make farmland, or you want to put in some kind of artificial thing into the ecosystem, you have to do a very, very long environmental impact study and try to predict every single effect that what you want to do in that area will have on the natural ecosystem, because it's really hard to predict how human activity could just make an area completely wonky. So this right here is an example of a tropical storm. This is a beach. This is like a cliff on a beach. So I guess the ocean would be like out here somewhere. But imagine this is a wave that is washed up against a cliff edge on a shoreline. Well, this big old wave has washed away a bunch of the dirt here and created an outcropping like a cliff and a rock, and it eroded away all the soil. It just washed it away all at once. Now, this is bad for these trees right here. Their roots are exposed. They're not as stable. They're not getting as much water because all their roots are just hanging out in the air there. So that's bad for them, these individuals. But, it's not bad for the area as a whole. It's not really that big of a deal. And also, the fact that this cliff face is now exposed could open up some opportunities for certain birds or insects or other life to actually dig burrows in here and live. So, there's trade-offs in all all ecosystems. One species disaster is another species opportunity. But, the balance here was disturbed. These trees up here right on the line are probably going to die, but not necessarily. And they're probably eventually just going to like fall over and crash down in here. But again, that leads to an opportunity for other species. Maybe some species can live in the dead tree. Maybe some beavers can get the trees and make a dam. Maybe termites will eat the dead trees. Ecosystems are imbalanced. They find ways to balance themselves. So that's just an example there. One of the things, let me find it here. Just want to go over, I don't want to rehash the same thing over and over again. There's one more example I wanted to show you that's on this slide that's pretty cool. We're just skipping. Okay, so Yellowstone. Has anyone been to Yellowstone National Park? I have. It's pretty cool. You should definitely go there at some time in your life if you have the opportunity. Yosemite and Yellowstone, those are the two national parks that you definitely want to try and visit sometime in your life. They're both very cool. But there's an interesting story for Yellowstone. When people were moving across America and setting up farms back in the 18th and 19th centuries, way back in the past, they were like clear-cutting land and they were bringing in cattle to graze, just domestic cattle, cows. At the time then, the apex predator was the gray wolf. It was like the gray wolf was the top of the food chain in the plains of the United States at that time. They would hunt deer, buffalo, elk, any hooved mammal. They would hunt in packs. They'd bring them down, and that's what they would eat. Well, when the farmers moved in, a lot of them, killed off the buffalo and used their meat and used their uh, skins and whatnot for whatever, and they brought in these domestic cattle. Well, the wolves were more than happy to eat the domestic cattle. They were actually way easier to catch and bring down than a big old rampaging buffalo. So the farmers they obviously had a problem with this. So the Department of Wildlife at the time, which was then called the Bureau of Science, basically put a bounty out on gray wolves for people to shoot and kill gray wolves, and you could turn in the pelt and you would actually get a bounty for it, on top of being able to sell the wolf pelt. Well, after that was allowed, the wolf population dropped to like almost nothing. It just practically wiped out the gray wolf population in the United States. Well, guess what happens then? The elk population went up like crazy because I don't know if anyone's ever seen an elk, but they're these big, giant, rampaging, angry beasts with huge antlers, and like nobody except a wolf was going to mess with these things. There was like nothing else that could get them. Like bears were there, but a bear can't really catch an elk usually unless it gets the drop on it. So a bear would have a hard time bringing down an elk. So the elk population just went completely crazy. And all the other elks, they like overgrazed the whole area. They just wiped out all the plants. They ate everything. And now all the other plant eaters in that animal started to starve. So the hunters came back in and they said, okay, let's start hunting elks. So, okay, now guess what? Now the elk population is pretty much like wiped out. So they're like, okay, this isn't good either. So let's stop the hunts. And then the elks came roaring back again. And the elks stripped the bark off the trees. They ate the trees. They ate all the leaves, and the aspen trees started to like become extinct in the area. Well, guess what? Now the beavers have no trees to make their dens, and the beavers have no trees to eat. So the beavers population declined. And then now that the gray wolves are gone, a new predator moves into the area, something that is a little bit more adaptable to the fact there are farmers around with guns trying to kill predatory beasts. And guess what those were? Coyotes. Coyotes, which to this day are a very dominant predator in the area. Coyotes reproduce a lot faster than wolves. They will scavenge stuff. They'll eat dead things. They're not as picky about what they eat. Coyotes eat rodents, small animals. They don't really go after big hooved animals because coyotes don't hunt in packs. They're singular predators. So they can only bring down small stuff. So they ate up the rodents. They ate up the non-poisonous snakes. Well, guess what eats those? Eagles, hawks, foxes. So now the coyotes came in. They eat all the rats and all the squirrels and everything. And now the eagles and the hawks have nothing to eat. So their population goes down. So do you see how just removing the gray wolves, just hunting the gray wolves to extinction completely messed up everything? The gray wolf was the keystone species in that area, and just tweaking the population of the gray wolves just whacked everything else completely out of whack. Um, and the ecosystem of Yellowstone National Park was just totally disrupted by that. In 1995, they actually reintroduced gray wolves. They brought in some gray wolves from Canada and Canada, and brought them back to Yellowstone and helped them reproduce and repopulate the area. And boom, like within 20 years, which is a relatively short period of time, the ecosystem was just, you know, back in action, just fixed. Homeostasis had been restored. Boom. Kind of an amazing thing for them to watch. Everything just kind of fell right back into place. For a multitude of reasons, because everything I just said basically kind of got reversed. Um, so this all kind of started with hunting. And if there are any hunters out there, you know that if you want to go hunt something, you have to wait for the proper season to do it, and you have to get a tag. Because overhunting is like the main thing that can put an ecosystem out of whack. And you know, it's relatively easy to get like a deer tag, but if you want to get a bear tag or an elk tag or something bigger, you really have to be really lucky to pull that tag. And the way they determine when to hunt and how many tags they're going to offer is biologists and ecologists go out into the field, and they kind of try to get an idea of how many of individuals of a species have been born recently, because they want to keep it at a very steady number. They want to make sure that it doesn't overpopulate or underpopulate. And the tag system is really weird. I've never done it myself, but both of my brothers have. But it's really kind of funny because it's relatively easy to get an archery tag for a deer. Like they'll say, you want to go out and try to bring down a deer with a bow and arrow? Go for it, because chances are most people won't be able to do it. some some people can. They're really good with bows and arrows, but you got to make a really clean shot in just the right place um, to bring down a deer with a bow and arrow. So an archery tag, it's like, sure, go for it, man. Here's your tag. But if you want to get, like, let's say you want to get a bear tag and you were allowed to use a rifle to bring down the bear, you got to get lucky. Like, they do not offer that many of those every season. And I don't even think they offer tags for bears with a bow and arrow because they don't want you to die. I could be wrong on that, but yeah, you try to use a bow and arrow on a bear. That's ill advised. Don't do that unless you know the bear's coming at you first. So the hunting is a very good way to control overpopulation of a species, because if they aren't kept in check, they can overeat, they can overpopulate, and they can just cause havoc in the ecosystem. So, um, yeah, that's but you know, it's got to be balanced. You can't just say, "Hey, everyone, go out and hunt whatever." Um, but ironically enough, I think right now it's like it's always open season on coyotes. You can go get a coyote whenever you want. Not that anybody really wants to do that unless the coyote is harassing your cats or something. All right, so let's go over the quick check questions here really quick. I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And I might have to readjust the window here. Okay, so I want you guys to know these answers, and these are gimmies because I want everyone to make sure that we have a good handle on disturbances and ecosystems. So this quiz, this quick checks is kind of a free because I'm showing you the correct answers here. We're just going to go over them. Which is an extreme disturbance to any ecosystem? An extreme disturbance, okay? Coral bleaching, that's bad, but that really kind of just affects a small area of coral unless it's a widespread event. Um, it only affects that local area. Elk overgrazing, again, that's fairly easy to bring back. But an extreme temperature change, that's something that can completely disrupt the whole ecosystem. It can change how the plants grow, when they grow, and even if they grow. It can affect if an animal can even live in that environment. It can affect how much water is available, or if the water is going to be frozen all the time. So extreme temperature change is an extreme disturbance. A hurricane comes in and blows some stuff around and it's gone. Not a big deal. So that's the correct answer on that one. When an ecosystem is disturbed by fire or toxic chemicals, it's going to affect everything in that ecosystem. It's going to affect living things in that ecosystem, especially toxic chemicals. Some living things might be able to endure the fire, especially seeds from plants and stuff like that. But it's going to affect just about everything that's alive. I mean, it's not going to affect just one species or one habitat or one food source. It's going to affect everything that's alive. Fire or toxic chemicals. That's kind of an obvious one. If deer are not hunted legally every season, a potential result is the deer population will decrease. The deer population will decrease. The smaller herbivore population will decrease. The predator population will decrease, or the plant population will decrease. So, why is this the correct answer? Well, let's go over that. Let's say that there's no deer hunting. Deer hunting is outlawed completely. The deer will overpopulate. Okay, they will start eating up everything, and they will overpopulate the area. And deer are ornery critters sometimes, especially if if you're around a big male deer. Well, they will outcompete the smaller herbivores in the area. The deer will outcompete things like the rabbits or the squirrels or I can't even think of any other smaller woodland herbivores right now. It's early. But anyways, you get my idea. Anything that's not a deer and smaller and cannot fight off a deer for food, that population will decrease because the deer will be eating up all of their food. So there will be less of the smaller herbivores in the area. An example of a severe disruption to an ecosystem is thunderstorm that knocks down some trees, not a big deal. Seasonal flooding of a river. If it's a seasonal event, then that means the ecosystem has become used to it. It's actually part of the balance, a seasonal flooding. If it happens every year, that's something that happens to the Nile River, and it's what allowed the ancient Egyptian empire to flourish. So that's not a problem. Repurposing a building in a downtown area. Well, if it's in a city and it's downtown and it's already messed up the ecosystem, that's not going to do anything else. Loss of a river system due to contamination. That's a pretty severe one. If a river system gets poisoned, contaminated, polluted, whatever, that's going to disrupt everything that lives in or around the river. So there's your answer on that one. If an ecosystem is irreversibly destroyed, species unable to travel or adapt will grow in population. That makes absolutely no sense. If their habitat is destroyed and they can't move or adapt, they're not going to grow in population. They'll find a new food source. Well, that's kind of a strange answer too, because their ecosystem was just destroyed. There's no food. Find additional mates? No, not really. Ecosystem destroyed. It's not really a time for dating. Or die out in an area. There you go. So if the ecosystem is destroyed, like badly, volcano eruption, meteor impact, something crazy like climate change turns your wetland into a desert, and that species cannot travel to a new area, and they cannot adapt because adaptation takes time. It takes many, many generations, sometimes thousands or millions of years to adapt. And it doesn't happen quickly. So if the species can't move to a new spot or adapt, they will die out. They'll go extinct if their ecosystem is destroyed.